Why did 4 and 4 skip lunch? They already ate. Yay. You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you, guys. Appreciate the support out there. Well, let's go ahead and power forward as community. A lot that we've been talking about all day today, even from the first panel talking about equity to the second panel challenging us to really think generationally when we take on conservation goals. And now we're going to talk about a critical piece of that equation, which is the resources, the moolah, the money. So it is with great privilege to be introducing Mr. Vu Le on nonprofit philanthropy and the audacity of imagination. Prepare to be inspired, challenged, and entertained by Mr. Vu Le, the irreverent voice behind Nonprofit AF. He's going to take center stage for us today and help us build our confidence and competence in a way to reimagine social justice in the nonprofit sector. He will be drawing from his experiences as a former executive director and his razor-sharp insights as an industry leader blogger. Vu will tackle pressing issues like equity and philanthropy, sustainable funding models, and authentic community engagement, while I'm sure putting a smile on all of our faces. So with that, Mr. Vu, please. Yeah. There you go.
Ooh, good. Whoa. Hello? Yeah, can you hear me now? Yeah? Is that good? Okay. Hi. Thank you so much for having me, and it's great to be in Puerto Rico. Also, I've been enjoying hanging out with Ángel because I like being called Mr. Vu and Sir all the time. So it's been, thank you so much, everyone. Nonprofit philanthropy and the audacity of ambition and imagination. I'm trying to be a little bit more positive, y'all. Because here was the original title of this keynote. Nothing is going to change. It's just hopeless, hopeless, everyone. But we're going to be hopeful because this is a room full of awesome people who are doing amazing things, and I think that we can be hopeful about what's happening next. Okay. By the way, I spent a lot of time on this PowerPoint, but it's just mainly pictures of baby animals. And they have nothing to do with anything that I'm saying. It's just that Japanese researchers discovered that looking at pictures of baby animals increases your productivity. They got a grant to study this. So the baby animals have nothing to do with what I'm talking about, and they're all adorable except one. It will kill you. And you have to identify which one it is, okay? All right, so what are we gonna talk about today? We're gonna talk about how awesome we are. This one is not gonna kill you, this baby chicken. We're gonna talk about how awesome we are, but also some of the challenges that we've been dealing with as a sector and what we need to do about it. Because we're doing awesome stuff, but there's a bunch of BS in the sector that we need to change, and I want us to reground ourselves in our imagination and our ambition, okay? A few disclaimers. One is that I have small children and I have not slept in about 10 years. Some of you may know this, but you have a baby, it's like getting a multi-year federal grant. Right? At first you're like, yay! And then you're like, this is so much work. And you can't, and the requirements change every year, and you can't give it back, and okay. 2 is that I don't claim to be an expert in anything at all. I write a blog called Nonprofit AF, which stands for Nonprofit and Fearless. Okay? That doesn't make me an expert, so feel free to disagree with anything that I'm saying. Ángel and I will have a conversation and then some Q&A afterwards. Feel free to disagree with anything. Also, I don't claim to represent anyone except myself. It's easy to say, oh, Vu, he's on stage. He must represent all people of color or all attractive vegans everywhere or whatever, This is just one person's perspective, okay? And also, I might say some stuff that might offend you, and I hope that's okay. I hope you lean into it, because we're going to address our ambition. We're going to have to talk about, like, white supremacy and things like that, okay? First of all, I just want to acknowledge how awesome we are. I think our sector is like air, whereas other sectors are like food. People see food, so they take pictures of food. They call themselves foodies. But the work that you all do every single day is like air, and no one appreciates air until they need it, until it is gone, right? That's what you do every single day. You allow our communities to breathe. But the challenge has been that we've been so invisible because we're air, and so we really need to raise our profile a bit, right? There's barely any shows about our work. I was watching a show called Is It Cake? Anyone watches Is It Cake? Yeah, it's a great show where they just bake these cakes that are very realistic, and other people have to guess, is this a cake or is it a shoe? Right? It's great. But the work that we do is just as awesome, and we are barely seen at all. So we need to like be a little bit more visible, okay? I mean, our work is so suspenseful. Like, are we gonna file that 990 tax form on time? Very suspenseful stuff, okay? The last few years have been really hard, y'all, okay? This was my auto response during the first year of the pandemic, and I got a lot of concern phone calls from this, right? Yeah, it's been very rough on all of us, and we cannot go back there anymore, all right? We cannot go back to the way that we have been operating as a sector for so long. Right, we're in this necessary existential crisis now, where we have an opportunity to talk about what do we want to be? Do we want to go back there to all the same stuff we've been dealing with that cause us to be sometimes really stymied in our efforts to change the world, right? Right now, things are very urgent. And I know you all know this, what's been happening in North Carolina and Nepal, the flooding and the rains and Hurricane Helene, what's been happening with the genocide of Palestinians, and the terrorism on Lebanon. Like, these are urgent things, and we just don't have time to deal with the BS anymore. I feel like we're like the Avengers. Who watched Avengers Endgame, right? We're like superheroes. We're trying to fight the forces of injustice, right? There's Thanos in Avengers, and he snapped half the universe out of existence. And then all the Avengers have to assemble to fight back and undo the damage that Thanos has caused. And I liken that to us. What you all are doing here is trying to reverse all the damages caused by inequity and poverty and racism and everything. But the way our sector has been operating, it's like if the Avengers were like operating like the way our sector has been operating, this is how it would look. It's like Iron Man would be like, I'm only going to give out 5% of my wealth to fight Thanos, because I'm saving 95% of my endowment to fight future Thanoses. Right? And Captain Marvel was like, you know what we should do to fight Thanos? We should spend the next 2 years to do a think tank to study who has been most affected by Thanos. And then 2 years later, they release a white paper, and it's like, guess what, everyone? It's people of color and disabled people and trans people who are most affected by Thanos. Let's have a summit on this. And we're going to put sticky dots on easel paper so we can vote on what we're going to do to address the injustices caused by Thanos. And then Doctor Strange is like, do we have to say that we're like fighting Thanos because that's so political? Can't we just be civil while we're talking about Thanos? Can't we just like meet Thanos in the middle? This is our entire sector right now. Okay, that's us. We don't have time for this anymore. Okay, we gotta have the audacity of ambition, y'all. Who has heard of Juicero? Anyone has heard of Juicero? No one has heard of Juicero. Okay, one person in the back has heard of Juicero. Juicero was a Wi-Fi connected juicing machine that came out of Silicon Valley. For $700, you buy this machine, and you have to subscribe to these proprietary packets of cut up fruit and vegetables. And you place one packet into this machine, and it presses out 1 glass of juice for $7. That's right, Silicon Valley, okay, $700. Bloomberg did an investigation where they took the packets and squeezed them by hand and got the same amount of juice, but faster. So they wrote about this, and Juicero tanked. They went bankrupt But before they did, they were boasting that they had $125 million in venture capital. They were boasting that they had 50 full-time engineers working to design this Wi-Fi connected juicing machine. I bring this up because that is the sort of ambition that I want us to have. Okay? I'm serious. Because some of y'all are like, can we please get $19 to end poverty and racism? And some of the funders are like, we'll give you $2 that you can only spend on paper clips on Tuesdays. And we're like, okay, we'll send you a handwritten thank you note now. This is our sector. We've been trained to be so apologetic about it that if we start applying for like $50,000 grants or whatever, we start thinking, maybe is this too much? No, it is not too much. Add like a 0 to your ask. Add like 2 zeros to your asks. Because chances are your work is way more important than a Wi-Fi connected juicing machine. All right? Have that audacity of ambition and imagination. I feel like in some ways we've lost our imagination. You know, like when I started talking about defunding the police, for example, a whole bunch of people from our own sector were like, oh, we can't say that. We can't defund the police. Who's going to protect us? Who's going to show up, hours after a crime and take notes? Like our imagination is just like, we've developed this learned helplessness now where we think this is all normal. That we can spend 10 or 100 times on the police that we spend on education. How is that? That's dystopian. And we think that that's okay. How is it okay for us to send another $8 billion to Israel right now while people are suffering in Asheville, North Carolina? How is that okay? And we just accept that as completely normal. We're going to stop putting up with all the BS in our sector. There's just so much bullshit that we deal with all the time. I mean, we're still talking about overhead, for example. Overhead. Because some funders are like, well, we're only going to fund you, but you can't use this money to pay garbage expenses like staff salaries. Because we're nice people, we put up with it. But I liken you all to like firefighters putting out the fires of injustice. Can you imagine firefighters rushing to put out these fires? And every 3 or 4 steps, someone stops you and says, I want to make sure that the money I'm giving you to put out the fires is being spent on the water and not the hose. What is your water to hose ratio? Right? And we're so nice, we're like, no, someone else is paying for the hose. You're only paying for the water. We got another donor to pay for the hose. All right, our hose to water ratio is like 15%. Really, our answer should be, get the hell out of my way. Okay, this is not a valid answer. This is not a valid question anymore. We don't have time for that. Everything is on fire. We don't have time to answer these ridiculous questions anymore. We don't have time for questions like, how are you going to sustain this program when this money we give you runs out? How are you going to sustain this program? We're going to keep fundraising. Okay, like that's what we're going to do. Maybe we don't sustain the program. Why are we sustaining this program? We're running the program. You're a funder. You sustain the program. Sustain it. I get so irritated by questions like, how are you going to leverage this grant that we give you to get additional funding? You're a funder. You know all the other funders. You go leverage. We're trying to save the environment here. Go do your job. I'm also very tired of the bisplaining we've been dealing with. Bisplaining is what my friend Alison Carney calls it when a corporation talks down to a nonprofit as if we had no idea what we're doing. It's like mansplaining, but like when for-profits do it to nonprofits. And it's very annoying. Okay, and we put up with it. By the way, thank you any corporate sponsors who have brought me here today. I appreciate it. Okay. It's so annoying. Yeah, I think we can definitely be grateful and we can be partners with our for-profit folks who sit on our boards and who are our donors and sponsors and things. But like it's getting out of hand. There's this superiority complex. And I'm tired of it. I mean, I talk to for-profit people and they're like, Vu, have you heard of this thing that we do in for-profit? It's called accounting. Do you know what numbers are in nonprofit? We are the best accountants here. When you are forced to play funding Sudoku every single day, you become an amazing accountant, okay? And we're expected to perform miracles on these limited, highly restricted dollars. Like, we gave you $10,000 last year. Why didn't you end racism? You know? Like, that's like an output. That's not an outcome, you know? Like, it's so annoying. Can you imagine if, like, Apple had to deal with this stuff? Can you imagine if someone goes to Apple and is like, hey, Apple, you sold like 1 million iPhones this quarter, but that's not an outcome. That's like an output, Apple. We want to know, Apple, of the 1 million iPhones you sold, how many people use their iPhones to update their resumes and then apply for jobs with their iPhones and then found jobs? That's an outcome. Or how many seniors fell and broke their ankle and then they used their iPhones to go into WebMD and learn how to foster a tourniquet for their broken ankle? And so they didn't go to the emergency room, and so they saved taxpayers money. How much in taxpayers' money did you save, Apple? This is what we're expected to do every single day, okay? And I'm tired of it. We don't have time for all this BS, okay? So let's not be besplained to anymore. We got to understand and own our power. We are still the third largest sector. And I think combined as a sector, we outnumber manufacturing and retail. We contribute like 6% of GDP, $900 billion to the economy every single year. And we're just filled with very nice people. Very nice, obviously very good-looking people. And oftentimes we are not assertive enough. And we need to be. We got to change the relationship between nonprofits and funders, y'all. I'm getting very tired of dealing with the same sort of BS with funders, right, who are giving out only 5%. They're saving for a rainy day when there is a monsoon on our communities right now, right? And we've been forced to play this Hunger Games with one another because we think that's normal. Can you imagine if a nonprofit operated this way? Can you imagine a food pantry going to hungry families and saying, hey, hungry families, we know that you're very hungry, but we are only giving out 5% of our food because we're saving up for future famines. So what we're going to do to make sure it's fair is we're going to ask each of you to write an essay about how hungry you and your families are and develop a logic model about what these cans of beets that we give you will it help your kids graduate from college. We want to know. And we'll give food to the families that wrote the best essay. That is grant writing in a nutshell, isn't it? Asking communities most affected by systemic injustice to prove that they are most affected and compete with everyone else. It should be the responsibility of the food pantry to find the families that are most affected by food insecurity and ensuring that they get the resources that they need. It should be the responsibilities of funders to find the communities most affected by systemic injustice and ensuring resources are going to those communities instead of forcing us to compete in this Hunger Games with one another. And we have to acknowledge, we've been so nice, we don't think about it. Like, we've been just internalizing a bunch of these philosophies. Like, this is other people's money. We should be grateful for it. No, this is not other people's money. So much of philanthropy has come from several inequities, including slavery, stolen indigenous land, worker exploitation, environmental degradation, tax avoidance, colonialism, and imperialism. And it seems that, we have to stop being so grateful. We got to be a lot angrier about this right now. We got to stop thinking there's only so much money to go around. Like, I'm getting tired of funders who are like, oh, there's only so much. No, there's $1.5 trillion just sitting in endowments and donor advised funds right now. We got to change our relationship with funders where we can't just be grateful anymore. If we're going to work as partners, then we're going to be honest with one another here. We got to learn from conservative funders and movements. Conservative funders have been extremely effective in their work. They're like, oh, you also don't believe in climate change? Great, here's $5 million a year for the next 30 years. Go, pack the Supreme Court full of conservative judges. Over here, we're like, we like what you're doing. Like, I think if Martin Luther King Jr. were here and he's like, I have a dream, y'all, the progressive funders would be like, yeah, we like your dream, but like, is your dream scalable? Like, what's your logic model for your dream? What's the research behind your dream? And has someone else done this dream before who has replicable, proven research on your dream? And, we'll think about it. But I'm not sure if your dream aligns with our strategies this year. And it's going to take us 12 months to determine whether there's alignment. All right, we got to get out of it. And we got to change the way we've been interacting with donors, y'all, okay? I'm getting sick of it. I'm getting sick of us constantly having to suck up to rich, mostly white people. All right? It's exhausting. Yes, right? And we've been trained to do this. We're like, make sure it's this donor-centric thing. Make sure you make donors feel like heroes. Put them on pedestals. Write them handwritten thank you notes. Make sure you use the word you at least 20 times in the appeal letter. You did this. Because of you, our community is stronger. Sick of it. I kind of liken donor-centered fundraising to husband-centered marriages. Okay? Now, I've been a husband before, and I would love it if every single time I did the dishes or something, my partner writes me a handwritten thank you note. Like, dear Vu, you did it. Because you load the dishwasher today, our family is stronger. Our community is better because of you. The children and I are so thankful for your presence in our family. Please come to this exclusive wine and cheese event for husbands like you. This is what we're expected to do. And because of that, because of this constant sucking up to donors, we're not honest with them. We don't ask them to think about where their family's wealth comes from. And again, a lot of it is from things like stolen indigenous land and tax evasion and things. Okay? We need to have a much better conversation with donors. We need to stop this Hunger Games we've been playing with one another, just constantly competing with one another for resources. We got to move towards Equity 201, y'all, too. Okay, we're still doing a bunch of ridiculous stuff like not disclosing salary ranges on our job postings, or must be able to lift 50 pounds or whatever. I'm a vegan. I can't even lift this microphone very much longer. Right? There's a whole bunch of, we need to move beyond this 101 that we've been talking about. So the 201 is things like talking to donors and funders about reparation and stuff like that, okay? We gotta get political, everyone. We've been terrified of being political or being even seen and perceived as political. And there's funders who are like, you can't do advocacy, you can't do, and they won't fund 501c4s and PACs and so on. Well, we're going to need those. We're gonna have to get a lot angry and we've gotta burn some bridges here. The last several months, I've been burning so many bridges. I've been burn some bridges. I finally stopped getting all these hate mails for my stance supporting Palestine the last few months, calling out genocide. That should not be controversial to call out genocide. Right? And this is one of those bridges we have to burn, because that's what aligns with our morals. This is the time where we have to take a stand now. Especially when everything is so urgent and on fire. We just don't have time for the BS anymore. We don't have time to be nice to people. We don't have time to be demure and cutesy. Okay? So, this is a lot. So I'm going to end with the ripples you create. Which one will kill you? This one? Yes, say more. What is this? Yes. It's actually venomous. Okay. Yeah, this is a blue ring octopus. It has enough venom to kill 20 adults. Okay. Yeah, you don't need to clap for that. But I want to end on the blue ring octopus because I think that we've been very nice. Okay, and that's okay. But sometimes we have to be a little venomous. And that's all right. But I want to end on a hopeful note because I've been lecturing at you for 25 minutes now. And, I think there's a lot going on. And I know there's so much on your mind right now with everything going on. And it can feel so hopeless sometimes. I feel hopeless sometimes. And I just want to remind us that the ripples you create they're very wide-reaching, and you may not be able to see them. I've been doing this work for a while now. I went into this work because my family was helped when we first arrived to the United States from Vietnam after a horrific war. where my father was imprisoned in a work camp for a couple years, and many of his friends were executed. And it was all these nonprofits that stepped in and helped me and my family and restored the sense of community and hope that we didn't think we would ever feel again. And it inspired me to go into this line of work so I could pay it forward. And I know it's hard for us sometimes to see the impacts of our work. But I just want to remind you that there are just countless ripples that are out there that you're creating every single day by the work that you're doing, even when it's most challenging, especially when it's really challenging. The ripples are wide-reaching. And I can't thank all those nonprofits that helped me and my family when we first arrived to the United States. So I just want to end by thanking you for all that you do every single day to make our world better. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Vu. Just pull up a couple chairs. Yeah. Here, pull one forward. Here, come on. There we go. Awesome, guys, right? We're feeling good, hopeful, inspired, ambitious. Heck yeah. All right, Vu, first question. Everybody wants to know, why can't you trust an atom? Because they make everything up. Oh, I stole that one yesterday from Mr. Pat Gonzalez Rogers, one of our steering committee members. No, but in all seriousness, Mr. Vu, today what you see before.
Wait, Ángel.
Okay.
What's yellow and caramelly and will help you grow your organization?
Yellow caramelly.
A strategic flan.
Oh, it's a little cake thing. Yeah. Awesome. That was unexpected. Well done, sir. Well done. What you see before you today are leaders from across the country, from Maine to California to Hawaii to Alaska. You're part of that in between. From Texas as well, yeah. Leaders from Puerto Rico, from across the country, truly, who have taken on the amazing, crazy idea to solve the largest conservation goal of this century. One of the commitments we made early on is that this should be led by the people who look like folks on the ground. And it is just a privilege to be able to look into that crowd and see so many beautiful, colorful faces who have made this a priority to make sure that we can change the world together. And this vision of America the Beautiful for all, without resources could become nothing more than a hallucination. And so before I get even to the first question, in our second panel, they were talking about generational planning and that big picture thinking. And so philanthropy is often focused on immediate outcomes and short-term goals, which can sometimes clash with our long-term vision of many nonprofits like Nuestra Tierra and many of the ones that you see represented today. How can funders better align with the movement of long-term system change? And I will just add to that question, because you see so many leaders here, how can we step up and almost lead up to build a long-term vision and lead by example, if you will?
Yeah, I will clarify that it's not philanthropy that is focused on short-term outcomes. It is progressive-leaning philanthropy. Because conservative-leaning philanthropy has always been long-term focus. It has always been strategic in getting political and doing lobbying work and, again, packing federal and state judiciary benches full of conservative judges and so on. Like the work they've been doing on the Supreme Court it's been ongoing for years now. They have been very strategic. So we got to be clear that it's not conservative funders. It is progressive-leaning funders who are stuck in this sort of mire, the spiral right now, where they don't think about the long term. And so we're going to be honest with ourselves. Then we need to conservative, progressive-leaning funders to have a very, profound realization about why they're doing this. and to have a come to Jesus sort of a moment where they realize that they're doing this because in many ways, if we were successful as progressive movements, it would pose as an existential threat to a lot of progressive philanthropy. We wouldn't have, if we were successful in doing what we're doing, we're successful in achieving these long-term outcomes, there wouldn't be much philanthropy because no one would have that much wealth to hoard in the first place. So if they're not willing to recognize that fact and work to mitigate it, there is nothing we can do. There will always be this resistance they will always feel, that and it's unconscious sort of resistance. They won't even acknowledge it. And if they don't acknowledge it, there will be unconscious barriers they will put up to prevent all of that. So I think step one is for us to be aware of that right now. Because otherwise we're just going to throw our heads against the wall just thinking like, oh, we just do this, if we just talk nicer to them, if we're just, or whatever, if we just, have more white papers or more summits or whatever, that it's going to change their mind. It's not. So I think what we need to do is probably to be a lot more angry about this.
Thank you. So my next grant, I'm going to go to the Heritage Foundation.
Yay!
And see if they'll help me take on this long-term vision to save the world.
See, but you joke about this, Ángel, but the Heritage
yeah.
Foundation has been very strategic in who they fund. And they will fund organizations for a long time, as long as it's effective in getting to their goals. Whereas we're lucky over here, we get like a 3-year grant. Totally. Like we're like, oh, a 1-year grant is the standard, and a 3-year grant is if we're lucky. Whereas for conservative movements, like a 20-year grant is standard. And like an indefinite 50-year grant is like if you're doing a really good job. Yeah. 6 months.
With monthly reporting. Yeah. No. And one of the power behind this coalition is that we really, from the very beginning, when we got pulled together a couple of years ago, we really prioritized the building of relationship because we knew that this work, when it came to the policies and the politics, would get a little muddy. But we took the time to build meaningful relationships, and so when we do take on those conversations, we trust one another, and we take their suggestions with the best of intent. And so we've done that as a coalition, and now we're excited to really see how we can build those meaningful relationships with the philanthropic community so that we can have some of these tough conversations and know that we're coming only from the best intent that is really truing to elevate and amplify the voices that have everything to lose, those from the front lines. So just wanted to say that out loud with this crew. Next question.
Sorry, Ángel.
Yeah, please.
I get really fired up. And,
oh, dude.
I get known as like the philanthropy dominatrix, where
Tell me more. Tell me more.
Look, I'm getting canceled for all of my public stances on various issues right now, so I got to think about a second career. So, nonprofit OnlyFans, where I just read
Vegan.
Successful grant award letters, while wearing a Ross Dress for Less shirt or something. But no, I do acknowledge, like, there are some really amazing funders out there, right? So there are incredible funders, and I think they are just as frustrated as we are. And they're trying to convince their friends to change. And we need to work with those funders because they're out there and they're amazing allies. So I want to acknowledge that before before people think that I'm just ranting all the time about funders.
No, I love it. Rant on, homie. Yeah, this is good. Power. Power is real. Power dynamics are a huge issue when it comes to philanthropy, where funders often hold the most of the decision-making authority if they don't get that handwritten note a couple days after. In your view, what can nonprofits, what can the leaders in this room do to shift the power dynamic where communities are prioritized and served and ensure that the funders know that they're supporting this vision rather than dictating immediate tactical goals?
Yeah, well, one is I would say we need to unlearn a few more philosophies. One that we've internalized that's been very destructive is this belief that if you have money, you're somehow knowledgeable about things you have no experience or knowledge with, right? We accept it as best practice. How, like in any other profession, if the people with the most amount of money, with the least amount of knowledge determining the course of action, that is called corruption. In our sector, it is called best practice. Because how do you explain someone who has a bunch of money to give and then they're like, well, you can't spend it on this, you can't spend it on overhead, you can't do this. That is a form of corruption. Like, why do you get to do that? You have, like, do I go to my dentist and say, hey, because you're working on my root canal, but because I'm paying you, you have to use this drill, this number 7 drill instead of number 3 drill. I don't do that because I don't have any expertise in dentistry. Why do we think that this is okay? So one is that we have to own our power. The funders, like we look about, like if we look at foundations leadership, most of them are white individuals from Ivy League institutions, on these foundation boards. They are the least knowledgeable people in the entire world about the issues that we're attacking right now. And yet they get to make the decisions on what issues you get to work on? No sense. That makes no sense. And we've been trying to say this for a long time now, but I think, again, we've been very nice. It's time for us to organize better. Jan Masaoka did something, the CEO of Cow Nonprofit. She said something that has stuck with me for a long time. She said, we've become so professionalized as a sector that we can write a theory of change, we can write a personnel manual, and we've lost the ability to get like 100 people to City Hall, or to get like 500 people onto the streets, or 1,000 people to sign a petition. We've lost that ability. That is one of the few things that is one of the most effective things in getting things to work. That's what we need to start doing more of. In Seattle, like 280 executive directors signed a letter, an open letter to the funders saying, look, there's a pandemic going on. Our communities are suffering disproportionately. You need to increase the amount of money you're giving out to communities of color. And it needs to be at least 5 years, it needs to be general operating funds. And sign this pledge saying you're going to do it. And they got several foundations to do that. Like, this is the type of stuff we need to be doing. I mean, I think about, like, when is the last time any of us have written, like, an op-ed kind of pointing out all these different discrepancies? No, we've been trained to be very nice people and to not push back at all, ever.
Conservation for us over at my team at Nuestra Tierra, we really try and live this by the strategies and tactics, because I agree with you. Conservation is the consequence of the deliberate cultivation of community, right? And so try to prioritize that first, and the rest will come when we focus on the who, the what will get us there. Mr. Vu, just Vu. Sir, you said a word earlier that took me back to grad school days, talking about learned helplessness.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that, or how it's...
Yeah. I got a psychology degree, y'all, which made my parents very proud. When I dropped pre-med to go into psychology and social work, they were so proud. But one of the things I learned was this study on learned helplessness, where they had dogs. It was a really terrible study, where they were shocking these dogs, right? On one side of the room, they had this mat where if the dogs were on that, they would shock it and it would jump to the other side to get away from it. But after a while, like, they just kept, it doesn't matter what the dog did, they were still going to get shocked. So even when they jumped to the other side, they still got shocked by the other side. And after a while, the dog just stopped. Even when they stopped shocking them on the other side, the dog still stopped jumping, because it learned that it doesn't matter what you do, you're going to get shocked. And I think in some ways that's what's been happening to our sector, is that we think that it doesn't matter what we do, things are not going to change. We can keep screaming about general operating funds, or the lack of funding going to our communities. It's still like 90% of funding has been going to white-led organizations. It's always been like that. There's never been a time where more than 10% has gone to community-led or communities of color-led organizations. And we just think, well, we've been trying. We've been trying now. And I think we have to snap out of this mindset. We have to. Our communities depend on us to snap out of this mindset and to be ambitious and to reclaim our imagination on everything, from defunding the police to getting funders to release beyond the 5%, stingy 5%, because they want to exist in perpetuity or whatever. At this point, there won't be a world left to save, right? I was talking to an environmental funder in Seattle once, a few years ago. We're getting into a heated discussion because they were only going to give out 5%. And I said, why are you doing this? You know we only have about 15 years left before climate change is irreversible. Why don't your foundation give out all the money right now to change policies and address this? And he said, well, there's going to still be environmental issues in the future, and we have to save up our money for the future. Just 5 years ago, his organization, because many of us have been like pushing them, saying, you need to sunset, you need to give all the money out. All environmental funders need to expend all their money immediately. And his foundation started sunsetting. So it is not hopeless. We have to keep going.
No, thank you for that. Yeah, absolutely. And just in thinking through an equity lens, it's not just conservation philanthropy that's acting crazy, right? It's all over the place. But who's doing it well? Who could we learn from and really build better strategies, tactics, and a vision?
There are lots of foundations that are doing some great stuff. I know a lot of them follow trust-based philanthropy, which is a movement to ground philanthropy in trust. And a lot of it is like give multi-year general operating funds, do your homework instead of forcing grantees to play this Hunger Games. I remember one funder, the Robert Sterling Clark Foundation, who just called me up one day. I was in my car to another meeting, and they said, Vu, we really appreciate what your organization is doing, trying to get more leaders of color into the nonprofit sector and build capacity of organizations led by communities of color. And we think you'd be a good match because we reviewed your website and everything. Can you just find a grant that you wrote for another foundation and just forward the whole thing to us? Don't even worry about changing the name of that other foundation. Just forward the whole package to us. And I hung up, and a single teardrop rolled down my face poetically. And I searched through my phone, Ángel, and I found this grant that we had written for the Gates Foundation that was 40 pages that had like 10 attachments, including a logic model and a theory of change and a work plan and a bespoke budget and the blood type of every staff member for some reason. Forwarded the whole thing, and we got $200,000. It took me literally 3 minutes to do. There are funders like that. There are some amazing funders doing incredible work. Solidaire Network, for example. Yeah, the Libra Foundation. There's some incredible organizations and foundations doing cool stuff. Even I think Bloomberg was doing some really cool stuff where he was paying I think if you are incarcerated and you get out, you still have to pay money back in order to be able to vote again or something. And they just paid those fees for all of these formerly incarcerated individuals so they can actually vote. There's some amazing stuff that funders are doing, and we need to lift those funders up instead of constantly catering to the ones that are doing shenanigans all the time.
Awesome. To every funder in the room, you'll be getting a handwritten letter from me thanking you and apologizing for this time. No. We're all here learning together, and we're pushing the envelope together, and that's what makes this crew so powerful and so beautiful. And so, because I have to get to a logic model here after this call, or after this talk, I wanted to open it up here for the next couple of minutes. If folks had any questions or feelings, are you okay with that, Vu?
Yeah, feel free. You can leave my personal appearance out of it. It'll be great. Otherwise, yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah. No. Chris.
Hey, this is Angelo from Saipan from Center for American Progress. We're up at the native table.
Hi, Angelo.
I wanted to just critique something you said. You were far too rosy. You said something like only 10% of the money is going to people of color. I just pulled up an article from Inside Philanthropy, and for $1 billion fund that was set aside just for indigenous people, 2.1% of that money went to indigenous people in 2022, And in 2021, 2.9% of that money that was supposed to 100% go to indigenous people, they got less than 3%. So you were far too rosy.
Yeah, thanks, Angelo. I was talking about the combine of all the money going to Black community, Latinx communities, indigenous, Asian, API communities, API.
I still think you were far too rosy.
Yeah, but if we disaggregate that out, then yeah, less than 2% is going to the Black community. I think about 2% goes to the Latino community. I think in some studies, it's less than half a percentage point is going to Native communities right now. And then funders are like really great, just saying stuff like, oh, you know, it's October, it's Indigenous Peoples Day. That is very annoying. So we have to remind them, like, is it Indigenous Peoples Day? Then you need to increase it for more than half a percentage point going to Native-led organizations right now. So don't let them get away with just saying stuff and feeling really good about themselves here.
Hola, gracias. I would love to see the funders that are here. And I just, you know, I mentioned it at the time when I sat there. I'm not even sure. You know, the group of everybody that has approached has been willing to join, like, a list to make sure that the expressions that I shared about what we want in Puerto Rico are heard, but that needs mobilization and needs money to pay the staff that are back home in Culebra working this out. So I was wondering what your recommendation is that we can ensure, I don't know the word targeting, but maybe it is the word targeting, the funders that are already going to be willing to hear what you're suggesting instead of us having to kind of scramble, especially from Puerto Rico, that some funders don't even acknowledge funding Puerto Rico, so in the mainland. So I just wondered if that is as you have some idea how to give us that.
Yeah, I'm definitely not an expert in the dynamics here in Puerto Rico. I would say, though, again, reiterating that we need to organize better. And I know it's easy for me to say this, right? Because we're all so stressed all the time in survival mode. That can be really hard to say, okay, now we actually need to spend more time and resources organizing ourselves into coalitions to push for funders to do this. I want to acknowledge that. And at the same time, I do think that we do have to reserve time to do that. And getting people into rooms together and getting funders and trying new creative strategies sometimes. Like, for example, I've been working on this, you know, like the crappy funding practices movement, where we will call out funders by name who are doing all sorts of just inane practices. Like the funder that had a 40-question application for $1,000. And there was another funder who gave out mini grants of $500, only 6 of them a year. And they were boasting that they had 4,000 applications for 6 grants. Like, we just don't have time for this. And I think that the more that we normalize that this is completely okay, instead of actually organizing and saying, this is not right, this doesn't make any sense. Going back to what I said about the 280 organizations in Seattle, right? It was started because a couple of executive directors, me and a couple of others, just got lunch and said, we need to actually move the funders and do something. Let's get together, let's do a Zoom meeting where we call a bunch of other executive directors. And 180 executive directors showed up for that Zoom meeting. And then when we drafted the letter, we got 280 to sign it. And that started this sort of avalanche effect where we started talking to funders here. So I think the first step is to not normalize the current situation here. But there should be more funding going to organizations that are doing incredible work here in Puerto Rico. But a lot of the funders, they also get a lot of terrible philosophies from the mainland. Right? The mainland is like, well, we only give out 5%. We're saving 95% in our endowments. Then that's going to affect the funders here on the island and everywhere, all over the world, in New Zealand and all over. Like, it's just terrible habits are being imported or are being exported from the mainland U.S. here everywhere. And we have to like fight against that, because otherwise it becomes normalized across the entire world.
Thank you. I wanted to add that I had an experience with a funder that I sent a thank you note, and he came back and he said, or they said, we want to thank you. So I think that's where we are headed to, and we appreciate your way of bringing it, that it's kind of like even joyful in a way. I was laughing here for a long time during your presentation, so thank you for that also. We need the humor. And I am going to post in that new app that I just learned about, Huawei or whatever its name, but I'm going to post like a invitation for creating that consultation here in Puerto Rico. So all of you here will be, all of you that are in that app, will be able to join if wanted. So hope you do.
Thank you.
So quick question, sorry. So I'm over here, if that matters. So I utilize, you have like a framework for kind of identifying where funders fall on the spectrum from like equitable to like terrible, essentially. And I one time was giving a presentation to funders using that, and I think I should have maybe toned it down a little bit or come with an army of other people, because the response to me was like, it was clearly like they understood that they maintained the power because they were the billionaires, right? And so like I could be as angry as I want, but like they, at the end of the day, have the money. And so even when we're in an organizing context, do you have recommendations for like what leverage do we have? So even if we organize and we say this is what we want, at the end of the day, they still have the billions of dollars and can kind of do with it what they please. So like, what are your recommendations around being effective when you do organize?
Oh, thank you. Yes, you're talking about the equity and grant making continuum that I developed with RVC, my former organization. Yeah, you can. It's on the blog. Yeah, there is definitely power dynamics that exist. And I think for us though, in order to really fight this, we have to acknowledge and do things differently. One is that I think that for a long time we've kind of legitimized the power dynamics by going along with it, by being trained to be super grateful to it. Why would they change? And we're constantly telling them how great they are. We're constantly writing handwritten thank you notes instead of acting as partners with them. So yeah, we've trained these wealthy individuals to believe that what they're doing is generous when they give any amount of money. And instead of actually telling them or getting them this message to them that you should be paying more taxes, bro. Okay, like this is, But we don't do enough of that. We need to start doing that. And it's going to take a while, but I think we're going to need to do that. A friend of mine a major donor attended a workshop where she discovered that her family's wealth literally came from displacing a native family and taking their land. And when she learned this, she had this epiphany that she is going to give 100% of her inheritance back to the native community when she gets it. Right? And if there hadn't been that workshop, if some fundraiser had not brought her, invited her to this workshop, she would not have thought about that. So I think for a lot of these wealthy individuals, they have never thought about these things because we have never given them the opportunity, really. I mean, yeah, it should be their responsibility to learn all this stuff, but they're in this bubble of wealth and privilege, and sometimes we got to figure out how to puncture that a bit. The other thing I would say is that like it's easy to give up, after you do a couple things, you give one presentation, and they are not responsive. You give another one or a third one, and you're like, well, I tried 3 times, and that's not enough. But the reality of doing change is that we got to keep going, and it is oftentimes like feeding Brussels sprouts to small children. I have small children, and science says that in order to get them to like a new vegetable, you have to expose it to them 8 to 12 times. The work that you're doing, the work that we're doing is oftentimes like feeding the Brussels sprouts of equity to privileged children. And you may think that you gave the 3rd or 4th helping and didn't do anything, but the reality is that you did something very important. And you may need to like take a break and hand the spoon to someone else to do it, but we have to keep going. It makes a difference when we keep fighting, keep delivering the messages over and over and there are things that are happening. Like the one billionaire, the millionaire who inherited a bunch of money, I think it was in Germany. And she decided that she's going to use a lot of this money to change the tax code so that there won't be so many millionaires in the first place. So it's happening, and I think in some ways our donors are outpacing us. There are some who are entrenched in their ways, and then there are others who are moving beyond us right? And we need to catch up too.
Maybe one or two more. Yeah.
Thank you for this. It was fantastic. It reminded me of an episode of The Simpsons of the last season that I watched with my daughter that's called Right Off This Episode. If you loved him like I did, watch it. I think it was based on one of your talks, to be frank. It was so good. My question is, feel free to disagree with me. I wonder, in my organization, how much of it is also our fault of keeping things the same and not making time to tell a good story, to refresh the story. My background is journalism and corporate, and my peers, they all nonprofit for a long time. So I clash among the marketing aspect of it, because we're in a battle for attention as well as dollars. And I feel like we're kind of losing the battle. There's some great stories that I see out there that I told not that great. So I wonder if you agree with me or not.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I also find it challenging that we're constantly forced in this, the Hunger Games for money, the Hunger Games for attention. Like, there's just so many Hunger Games out there, and I don't want us to keep playing them, right? It's really exhausting that I think in some ways we've become like this like Sky Mall catalog for rich people. I mean, do you know what I'm talking about? Like, when you were on the plane, there's like this catalog of all these cool, interesting things, and you're sitting on the plane, and you gotta flip through this catalog to find that like amazing solar-powered gorilla statue or whatever. And I think that's kind of what's been happening to our sector now, is that we're in this catalog vying for the attention, hoping that rich people, they'll flip through this catalog and they'll land on our little square with our paragraph, and hopefully we've told a good story enough for them to pick that item and purchase us. And I want us to get out of that mindset entirely and get them to understand that these are very urgent situations, and it doesn't matter how good our storytelling is. It doesn't matter how much we can tug at their heartstrings. Like, I'm tired of having to tug at the heartstrings of people, because this is what happens when we fall into that, is that the causes that can tug at heartstrings and can tell the best stories are always going to get the funding and resources. And it's always going to be like puppies and small children, and those are always wonderful. But it's going to be harder to tug at the heartstrings when it comes to genocide, when it comes to police violence against our communities. Because it's just not going to be easy telling those stories, because they're going to be heart-wrenching. And so this idea that we have to tell heartwarming stories of the hero's narrative, where the donors are heroes, and they can help and they can be part of the story, this amazing, happy story. A lot of our work are not going to have happy stories that are easy to tell. So we're going to have to train our donors. They're going to have to support things that don't have easy, understandable stories, where they are the heroes.
Boom. Last question, guys.
Thank you. Mr. Vu, thank you. When you were saying, you know who has it figured out, and you answered the conservative funders, I thought you actually were going to say the non-Westerners. So I have very little experience with international philanthropy, but when we're thinking about generational planning, I thought what you were saying is we have to challenge the capitalism. We have to challenge the immediate rewards. So how do we challenge that?
That's going to take another hour at least to really...
I have time in the pool.
Right. I'll meet you at the pool to discuss this. Yes, capitalism, I mean, we're reaching the stage now where it's undeniable just how awful it is. Honestly, capitalism. You know, we're holding on to this, and it's like late stage capitalism, and it's awful, and so much philanthropy has been based on it. And international philanthropy, I mean, there's some good people doing great stuff, but I was just in Kenya a few months ago. There's some awfulness out there, exported from the United States through the IMF and through other banks that have just been destroying communities. You know, and then we get sent over there as like heroes. And it reminds me of those spring break trips where we send kids over to Venezuela to paint, you know, walls at an orphanage or something. So much philanthropy has been like that. And I don't know, I get very frustrated and I get very angry because, you know, like, we have all the privilege of being here, and many of our community members just don't, and they don't have the language or the relationships to talk to our donors and our funders, and then we go talk to them, and things don't change, and it's very frustrating. And I would just say, yeah, we need to do things differently. And again, a lot of the conservative funders are doing it. So I don't like it when progressive leading funders are like, well, what do we do? There's no roadmap for this. There is a roadmap for this. What conservative funders have been doing is the roadmap for this. We just need to take what they're doing and align it with equity and justice. That's what we need to do. But in order to do that, we have to get these wealthy, privileged individuals to acknowledge that they like the system that they're in because they benefit from it. They get to be seen as heroes. They get to be treated by us as the heroes. And it's time for us all to wake up.
Pop off, as my daughter would say. Guys, well, thank you so much, Mr. Vu. You know, one of my colleagues reminds me often that conservation is truly the bridge between tradition and tomorrow. And so we have to make sure and take this work and take philanthropy and our donors as our partner to challenge one another, to learn from one another, and really prepare for tomorrow. So with that, thank you guys so much. Appreciate you all. Thank you, Mr. Vu.
Thank you.